Everybody knows that I am a Mustang fan, a Ford guy through and through. And while I would never trade my first car, this 1967 Mustang, for anything in the world, I am still a hot rodder at heart. So why do I say that I'm still a hot rodder at heart? Because for the longest time I did have a hot rod. I had a 1937 Dodge, as I may have some glimpse in some previous videos. It was a 37 Dodge four-door. We found it on Anna Maria Island originally. I've kind of been the hunt. We had had the Mustang on the road for a while. I had then taken on another vehicle, a hot rod, a 78 El Camino, and I was just digging the street rods, the hot rods at the cruise-ins and the car shows. So I was on the hunt for a 30s car. I actually was looking for something a little older than a 37. I wanted somewhere between a 30 and a 35. What was even entertaining 29s. But we rolled out to Anna Maria Island to get dinner one night, and on the corner of Gulf Drive and one of the other streets there, can't think of it all of a sudden, but next to Pete Renard's when that used to be there, there was a service station on the corner, still is actually. And out front was the 37 Dodge, and it was horrible color. It was booby pink. Let's just say it. Now we'll say it Pink Panther pink. Actually, Pink Panther was on the trunk, a little mural of it. But anyways, it was a four-door, pink, and it definitely needed some work. But however, it was a driver. Was not going to be my first choice. We passed it by. I'm like, oh, look at that. Maybe we should look at it. But the more I drove out to dinner, as I ate dinner, I got to thinking about that car. And I thought, you know what? It's different. I don't think I've seen one of those at the shows. Not something like that. I didn't know that it was a Dodge at the moment. But anyways, on the way back, we stopped. And sure enough, the honeymoon doors, front doors open normal, rear doors open suicide, split rear window, fat fendered car. Uh, it was not that expensive even for those times. So we decided, what the heck? We were going to go ahead and buy it and give it a whirl. We took it for a test drive. It was a driving car. It had ice cold air. Um, it had a Pontiac 400 with a 400 turbotrans with a B&M slapstick shifter and manual valve body. And it pretty much had like just stock interior. It was on an LTD subframe, which I couldn't understand at the time why someone would do that. And anyways, we knew that was going to change immediately when we looked at it. But anywho, it had some rust in it, but for the most part, it was a solid car. It wasn't leaking, and it drove. It had power steering, power brakes, air. It checked all the boxes. It was unusual, which checked another box, and it was a 30s hot rod. And because it wasn't a pure car, I had no problems cutting it up and doing more modifications to it in the future. So at the time, ironically enough, I had started DJing local car shows and cruise-ins. We had a DJ that exited the scene that I had helped for a while, and while I was scared to death to get on the microphone, I ended up taking the reins, and we ended up doing car shows for like 6 years. But regardless, at that time, I had started up. I was looking for something to start carrying equipment in, and lo and behold, the 37 fit the bill. So it was a driver. So we started loading the DJ equipment up. Me and my dad started these cruises together, and we were hauling the equipment in the car, and we were doing local cruise-ins and some car shows here and there, DJing them. And what a great car to take equipment in, right? I mean, we were living the life there. So when I wasn't DJing though, we would take the car the cars to car shows. So my dad loved the 30s car, and he was an ex-bike builder, racer, custom bike builder, by the way, and then he was a dealer later on for Triumph, and then after that Yamaha. But he was big in the hot rod scene back in the days, and when I say back in the day, I'm talking like 50s and 60s. I mean, he grew up all around that. So, anyways, when we were starting to go to car shows, he favored driving the 37 Dodge Street Rod. So that kind of become his car. He kind of become attached to it. So sometimes I would drive it, and he would drive maybe my Mustang or the 78 El Camino. But a lot of times I could tell that he preferred that, so I would take one of the other cars to let him drive that. So, anyways, we drove that car like that for about a year, and I kind of made a quick joke. I said, "Hey, there's a hinge on the bottom driver's door that was rusting through," and I said, "Hey, when that rusts through," it was kind of a inside joke between him and I. When that hinge breaks and we can't function as driver's door anymore, then we'll pull it from the road and we'll start working on it. But hey, I just want to see how long that lasts. It was kind of a joke. And anyways, he sadly suddenly passed away in '97. And anyways, I didn't know it, but he had put some money aside to help me with refinishing that car. And so after he passed, ironically, again, the door hinge broke shortly after. And I said, okay, I guess that's a sign from above that we're going to start working on this car. So, seeked out a friend of mine, Ken McDowell. He was building hot rods at the time, and we commissioned the build through him basically, and got quotes, and we started working on it. Well, he started working on it, and at the time, I didn't have the patience or the fortitude to learn some of the heavier skills that have learned or still learning now after the build on the '67. I did a lot of cosmetic work. I did some top end rebuilds, did some other mechanicals, suspension work, brakes, tuning cars, all that stuff I knew. But when it come to like subframing and body work, that was just not in my wheelhouse. So basically, Ken, he pulled the LTD subframe, and he ended up putting a '79 Camaro subframe with power disc brakes, power steering subframe, and attached that, boxed it into the 37 frame. And we pulled the 400 and the trans out, ended up using those as cores, and we got a Chevy 350, a late '60s, early '70s Corvette motor that had been, he rebuilt it, put a mild cam in it, and I was looking for an overdrive transmission. Now, the Turbo 400 probably would have been fine, but we were looking for a 700 R4 at the time. That was the hot trans to get. And so that's what we ended up finding and rebuilding that. And then he surprised me. He put a Columbia overdrive. So now imagine this. This was a 4-speed overdrive automatic transmission with a Columbia overdrive on toggle. All my controls was on the top. We were making a console upstairs for it on the roof. And I'd get that car up at around 70, 80 mile an hour on interstate, kick that Columbia overdrive in, RPMs would drop to 1700 RPM, 1750, and I had 3/4 of the pedal left. The car just hummed along at a low RPM, and it made an absolute awesome cruiser, especially across the state. The reason why we had it built that way, and another thing, I also asked him to set up the subframe, the steering, to be as tight as an old '84 BMW 7 Series I ended up running across and buying. And basically, I said I'd seen all the 32, 34 Fords doing 5 and 8 point turns at cruising. I said, I don't want to be that guy. I'm going to be driving this car all the time. I'm going to be driving across state for car shows and stuff, which I'll explain in a minute. And I said, I really wanted a tight steering. And he made that happen. I could turn that thing on a dime. He'd turn the wheels and they'd stick out the fenders like that. It was amazing. But anyways, the reason why we had the car built where it would do long distance driving like that is because I had fell into a job at an automotive magazine, and during the week I was doing graphic art layout design for ads and articles. I was a car show editor of Cruising Style magazine. The owner had me doing the mailings and stuff, but on the weekends I was out doing the photojournal. That's actually how I started. I just started. He asked me. He knew that I knew a lot of people across the state from doing the car shows and stuff. And anyways, I said, well, I don't really know how to write articles. Well, I learned a new calling. I had a knack to a wordsmith, I guess. I didn't realize I had. So we ended up doing articles, photojournalism, contributing, and then I eventually got hired on. So we actually used that car once it was back on the road, not only for daily driver, but we also all over the state doing car shows, covering them and stuff like that. So, anyways, Ken, back to the build, Ken McDowell. Some of the changes that we did, we shaved the door handles, put street rod tail lights in the back, put a third brake light in the back. We suicided the front door. Well, he suicided the front doors, and that was a feat because he made his own hinges. We could find hinges at the time that could do that on a four-door, not with a narrow B-pillar. So anyways, we did that in honor of a friend of mine that had a 37 Packard that had been repowered with 440 Olds, and it had the factory four-door suicide. So I did that basically kind of as a tribute to that car. Got rid of the bumpers, filled all that in, fixed the rust, power trunk, power doors, power windows, and anyways, we got the car back on the road. And before we painted it, Ken suggested that we put it in gray catalyst primer because of all the body work and the Frenching stuff that he did. And he said the reason being is we want the body to settle. It's probably going to crack in a few places. Let's let it crack while it's in primer. We can fix it a lot easier, and that way when we get the body solid, then you can put a paint job on it. So that's what we ended up doing. We ended up spraying it with the Catalyst Gray. Now you will see in the pictures that I'm showing that you saw the engine and the firewall, which was flushed, and the door jambs are all painted a turquoise. That's Indian turquoise. So we had jammed it out because that was the color that we were going to go with the car, and then we painted that gray catalyst so we could kind of let that body settle. So the idea was, if you remember, back in the 90s, the pastels, the pinks, the bright reds, the candy-colored street rods that were hitting the scene at that time, they were all high-tech, right? Dakota digital gauges, they had height suspensions, some were even airbag controlled, all tweed interior, putting all the modern amenities into a classic car, but not just, a resto mod. These things were like full on, like modernized. The only thing that was really resembling the street rod was the body, right? So that was kind of the idea at the time. We built a custom dash. We put the Dakota Digitals in there, which, by the way, I don't know, some people may call BS on this, but they didn't have a turquoise that was close to the Indian turquoise that I was wanting to match the car. I had to wait a few months and they come out with it. I don't know. I'm just saying they didn't have it in the catalog before. I was on the phone with them. We were talking about it. They said give them a few months. I think about 3 or 4 months later, those turquoise LEDs were out. Remember, this was 98. So I don't know. I'm just saying that's what happened with the car. So don't know if I was the first with Indian turquoise Dakota Digitals, but it sure seemed like it. So anyways, that was the idea. We were going to high tech it with everything, make it nice and with tweed interior. I even had some panels, drawings for, palm trees. We were going to go tropical with it. And anyway, so there it is. It's in Catalyst Primer. We finished the interior off, jute and, the insulation, and just enough interior just to get us by. We didn't have flex steel seats. We started out with Buick Riviera bucket seats, but we ended up finding some Tyra flex steels that were in brand new condition. And boy, did that change the comfort of that car, come with the seat belts and everything. But anyways, we kind of stopped there because we knew we didn't want to go too far on the interior and then have to paint the car. So we were kind of at a holding pattern, but we were out enjoying it. Well, here comes summer, right? And some friends of ours that had been making a regular summer vacation, summer trip down to Key West invited us, me and my wife, well, at the time girlfriend Darlene, to go along in the 37. And we had, so there were several of us that were supposed to go. It ended up just being 3 cars. There was quite a few, but you know how that happens. Things happen, people drop out. So we were going down 4th of July weekend, which meant one thing, especially in Florida, especially in the Keys, rain, and lots of it. And I knew that I could not drive that car with the oncoming summer and that trip with the rain in that Catalyst Primer. It will just soak the water in, and then that would contaminate the metal and we could paint it, but then that was going to yield to problems later. So my wife and I had the idea to wet sand the car, get it prepped, and we shot it with PPG base coat black, basically satin black. And after we shot it, it was gloss black, like a semi-gloss. And I thought that was just the coolest thing. It was nice and smooth. We could really wipe it down, and keep it clean a lot easier than a matte black or a satin black. This was more like a semi-gloss. And it was due to our wet sanding that caused that, because there was no clear mixed in. And it turned out we went on that trip down to Key West, and it was just a fantastic trip, and we had a lot of rain. But you know what? We had the car painted to kind of combat that, so that was really cool. Now, in the pictures that you see of us in Key West, you'll see some other pictures of a couple couples actually that had some hot rods. Well, who did we go down with? We went down with Greg Gort, who owned at the time Gordy's Deli. His nickname was Gordy. He had a 48 Chevy Fleetline that was a hot rod. And then we had Jim Nelson, who had a channeled, not a chop, but he did have a channeled and sectioned 32 Ford hot rod truck. Well, the couple that we met down there at Key Largo on the way, their names elude me. And forgive me, I know we did an article on them, but I couldn't find the article in the magazine. I could find the article of the show where we met them at the first time, but anyways, I can't remember the names, but they had a 40 Ford convertible that was resto modded, probably before that term was even coined. And then they had a Ford truck. Now, here's the cool story why I'm including this in the video. We had met them at car shows before. They found out we were going to Key West, and then they said, hey, stop by. And we met some of their friends with a 29 Ford and a couple others. So they had a 40 Ford convertible in high school when they were dating. He etched, the husband now, he etched their initials in the frame by the trunk. Gas tank. I don't know why, I don't remember the reasoning behind that. Had the car, dated through high school. As they got married, he realized that he was, becoming an entrepreneur, and he wanted to start a race team. So they sold the car and a few other things to start that. Well, fast forward, say, probably 30 years after that, or 25 years after, I would say 30 years, they were on the hunt for another 40 Ford convertible. Now, his stipulation was the car had to drive. So they went to North Carolina to pick one up that looked promising. And as soon as he took it for a test drive, he knew he wasn't going to make the trip to Florida. Later, he found one more out in the Midwest. Went out there, kind of in rough shape, but it was, all complete, running, strong. He knew it was going to make it home. And they drove it all the way home to Key Largo. Well, they tore it apart to start the restoration. Guess what they found in the trunk? That's right. Their initials etched in the same place in the frame next to the gas tank. Chills, right? My hair is still standing up on my neck. I tell that story every time. They had bought their old car back. So they restored it. They had a big, I don't think it was a big block, but they had a Shelby motor in it at the time, and they did it up real nice. Anyways, it made a nice article in our magazine. I'd covered that car, and we had become, I'd say, good friends for distant friends for the distance that we live. And we would see them at car shows. So we went by there, we visited them, hung out, had a blast, ended up going down, to Key West. We went to Mallory Square, did the fireworks down there. Of course, we Sloppy Joe's, Duval Street, Lighthouse, snorkeling. We all did it. The Hemingway House. We'd had a nice time down there with the cars, and that was the 37. I mean, it drove these trips all the time. Every weekend, I drove it every day. Why am I saying I'm still a hot rodder? Because I lived that. I drove that car 8 to 10 years, probably 8 to 9 years as a full-time driver, and loved every minute of it. And I really, truly do miss that car. So anyways, we get back, and plans started to move forward that we were going to put a paint job on the car. Well, guess what? Everybody loved that satin black. Everybody loved the interior undone. I didn't at the time. Everybody loved the way the car looked. They said it looked sinister. That was sinister. That was kind of the word that they were using. And I started to realize that I did not want to do the high-tech street rod. I went to a show after this was brewing in my head and watching people react to the car. I'm talking people who had nothing to do with the car shows had come up with their kids. Now, I'm not telling you that they didn't look at the higher dollar street rod. Oh, they absolutely did. But there were times I would be next to an $80,000 to $100,000 street rod, and and a guy and his wife and kids would come over to my car and get pictures with it. I don't know what attracted them. Maybe it was the rustic feel of the car, the just the simplicity, the rudimentary persona that it had. Went to a show at Coachman Park in Clearwater and saw the most plain Jane 32 Ford Roadster you'd ever seen, and just plain old vinyl interior with the drawn pockets in the doors and the spoke wheels, all motor, plain Jane paint job on it, painted wheels. And I looked at that and said, oh my God, that's the kind of car you would see if you walked onto a high school parking lot in 1960. That was just the first thing that popped in my head. And immediately the plans changed with the car. Well, we ended up not finishing it. We left it just the way it was. We left it with the satin black on, or well, actually the gloss, semi-gloss black. We left the interior alone. We ended up driving that car probably 60 to 80,000 miles and just had a blast. And it was one of those cars where you still worried about it. But you know what? You could park it at a parking lot. If you got a ding in it, you just kind of sanded it down, shot it, blended it in, and moved on down the road. It was just so much less stress. It was so fun. People were drawn to that car. Well, we ended up driving it for, like I said, another probably 4, 5, 6 years as a daily driver. So at this point, you might imagine that it could have been considered a rat rod at that time, or in these times. And actually, it really was. Um, Painting it that satin black and leaving the interior with metal showing and the only, no door panels, no headliner, no carpet, just seats, a little bit of insulation to kind of make it comfortable, and all motor. Yeah, that was ahead of the time in 97, 98. That was before flat car paint cars were really accepted. It was controversial even, and I didn't know what I was doing at the time. All I know is people were reacting to this car. It was different. I loved the way it looked. The rawness was just really, you know, was really vibing, and I think that I was ahead of that craze. The rat rods. Of course, the rat rods have gone to another extreme of the spectrum too. They're more the budget rods, as we used to call them, that were just all patinaed and rusty with motors and stuff that looked extremely raw, like you just pulled it out of a, you know, junkyard and got it up and running with a good motor and everything, and then got it on the road, get it stable. Those are now what everybody calls rat rods. But what I was driving and some other people were driving in the day, those were the pioneers of the rat rods. I really do believe that. We had the opportunity and the privilege to meet Paul Le Mat. I said we had been through several venues with the car, and we were at the Street Rod Nationals one year, and Paul Le Mat, he played John Milner in American Graffiti, drove the yellow coupe, and he was at the Street Rod Nationals in the early 2000s, signing autographs, making an appearance, and somehow we befriended him, and he ended up hanging out with us for probably 30 minutes or so. Uh, just the reason why that was arranged is my wife loved his character in the movie. She always wanted to meet him. So I surprised her with that, got a picture of her with him, as you see in the pictures. Anyways, that's Paul Le Mat. Got to meet him in the 37, got to hear his stories. It was so cool. And oddly enough, we got to see Paul Le Mat another, I think, 2 times after that. We saw him again in Zephyrhills. He didn't recognize me then, but we hung out for a little bit at the booth and we talked. But the third time we saw him at Daytona at the Turkey Rod Run in November, this was probably same year, just a little later in the year. He was, I guess, staying in this area. He actually called us out as we were walking by. I didn't even see him. He was at one of the booths. Of course, there's 3,000 vendors there, plus 6,000+ cars at the track, and he actually called us out and said hi. And I'm like, oh my God, Paul Le Mat recognizes me and my wife. That felt really weird, but what a cool thing. And I made my wife's day by arranging that and surprising her. And unfortunately, after a lot of shows, a lot of different venues that we went to, it ended up off the road about the same time this one ended up off the road for a very different reason. And I had no inkling that both cars would end up off the road for many years. But things happened. Life took over. I was working on these cars, trying to get things corrected, rebuilt, back on the road. And we ended up moving. The cars ended up in another location for a while. It took us a year to get them to the house. And then I ended up having some health issues. And I was trying to get out in the garage and do work on the 37 because I thought it would be easier and quicker to get that up and running because I knew this was a full teardown. And I just couldn't do it. I'd get out here and I'd work maybe 30 minutes to 45 minutes an hour, and I was just sick. I mean, sick as a dog. Well, finally, after a few years of messing around with that, my wife sat me down and said, "You're sitting in your garage, and somebody come in with money and said, I don't care which car you're selling, but I'll buy one of them. Which one are you going to sell? And don't think about it." And I said, "The 37, of course. There's only one first car, and I'll never get rid of it." She goes, "Then do it. Get rid of the 37. You're struggling, and let's take that money and get your 67 back on the road." So regretfully, ended up selling the 37, and a gentleman out of Apollo Beach bought it, and I gave him a good deal on it, and because still wasn't running. They were skeptical. A couple hot rodders come down and looked at it, but I told them exactly what I knew it needed to get back up and running on the road. I knew it ran. What took it off the road, ironically, was minor in comparison to what took the 67 off the road. Anyways, they bought the car, and within about 6 months, the guy had his own shop and performance shop he was working. So on the after hours, he was working on a 37. And outside of a water pump that I didn't know would go bad, but I guess it went bad sitting, he got it up and running with just about all the effort that I said I would take, and then he had it on the road. First time he went to one of the cruises up there in Apollo Beach, he got Cruiser of the Month. So how cool is that? And so anyways, him and his family was driving, and he was looking for a hot rod because he had kids, and ended up getting an opportunity to get a practically finished 1950 shoebox Ford straight up trade for the 37. So he ended up trading a gentleman in Jacksonville for the 50 Ford. I ain't gonna lie, that thing was cool. It was like cream and maroon. I got to see it, and before I think he moved on to something else. But it was a cool car, and I said, "You know what? I'm not mad at you. I might have done the same thing. It was really cool." So, anyways, car went to Jacksonville, and I've lost track of it since. I have no idea uh, where the 37 went. But we ended up taking that money and putting it into the 67. So about a year later, ended up getting a handle on my health issues. I was able to get back out in the garage. I was starting to get used to working in the heat again without getting sick. And a friend of mine, good friend of mine, Bob Moran, said, "Hey, get your car over to my house. Let's start working on it a couple hours a night, once a week, one day. We targeted a day." And between him and several other of my friends, Richard Bacon, Nick Basil, um, my wife, Darlene, uh, Matt Walsh, and Glenn Hayes, and probably the list goes on. If I'm missing somebody, I truly uh, apologize. Carl Moore had a bit into it, the build as well with Gentry Millison. So, like I said, I'm probably and yeah, I'm probably missing somebody. But anyways, it was a community effort to get this car back on the road, and luckily I had some of the money from that 37 left over, where we could subsidize the funds to get the major repairs, rebuild on this done, and we got it back on the road after 3 years of working on it. My first car is back on the road. We've been enjoying it now for almost 6, believe it or not, 5, at least 5, but it's going on 6 now, and if it wasn't for selling the 37, it might have took me a lot longer to get this back on the road. So, do I regret it? Not in the face of getting my first car back on the road, but do I miss my hot rod? Yes. I've been looking for a 30s car. I've been looking at 30s cars for a while now, because eventually I want to get back into a rat rod. We do have the 54 Pontiac. Promise my wife will get that done, so that's going to be first. We have the 59 Caddy, which was supposed to be my next daily driver. I never had 1950s cars before. It's just the Caddies turned out to be a bigger project than anticipated. Knew there was going to be work on it. Knew we were rolling the dice. It is what it is. So I'm I'm so busy working on this still and enjoying it, especially during the cooler months. I've kind of let the caddy sit, but we're gonna, got to push myself to get back on that. I've got a couple, two major projects left really on this to do to call it good. That is AC. I would like to put AC in it. That's the biggest chunk of the money, and then newer style seats. I want to get something like S197 seats or the old original Mach 1 high back seats with a little bit of lumbar support and take those original low backs out. Outside of that, this car is driving really well and we're enjoying it out at the shows and using it in my videos. But I am going to tell you, there's times when I'm driving the Mustang, I reflect back on the days of the old hot rod and when we were driving every day and cruising in it and the memories that I built with my dad and my wife in that car. I could go on with the stories, but you'd probably end up clicking the channel off and moving on. But yep, I do still look back and wished I still had the old 37, but I'm looking forward, trying to move forward with this, get this one on the road. I think this is really cool. Again, another unusual car. And maybe someday I will be back into a street rod or a hot rod and kind of back in my element in the hot rodding world. So anyways, that's my story on the hot rod that I used to own, the 37 Dodge 4-door. And I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure this hits home with a lot of people with, man, I wished I'd have never got rid of it. One of the reasons why I never sold this, it's not a convertible or a fastback. It's a plain Jane coupe. That's okay. It's my first car. And I never wanted to say I wished I'd never got rid of it. So sacrifice the street rod, the hot rod for this, but maybe one day we'll have another hot rod in the driveway or in the garage, right? Hey, thank you for following us. Thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Like, comment, tell me about your car. What car did you have that made the most memories, that sticks with you in the back of your mind, that you think about all the time? What do you miss the most? Let me know. And we will see you on the streets. Have a blessed day.